The cafe should have been closed at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, but Jessica's silver Honda was still parked outside Jessica's table, and the lights were dimmed just enough to create what my ex-military brain recognized as intimate ambiance. Through the front window, I could see my wife of 12 years pressed against Eric Dalton like they were auditioning for a romance movie. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Well, isn't this cozy? I muttered, pushing through the unlocked door. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Jessica's face flushed crimson, her carefully styled blonde hair slightly mussed. Eric, all 6'2" of smug real estate money, straightened his expensive tie with the kind of casual arrogance that made my teeth itch. Vince, Jessica's voice pitched higher than usual. You're early. I thought you were working late at the garage. Clearly. I set my toolbox down with a deliberate thunk that echoed through the empty cafe. Don't let me interrupt your friendship. Eric smirked, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. Vincent, good to see you. Jessica and I were just catching up on old times. Old times? I nodded slowly, my gaze shifting between them. Is that what we're calling it when a married woman lets her ex-boyfriend feel her up in her own restaurant? It wasn't like that. Jessica stepped forward, her green eyes flashing with indignation. God, Vince, you're so paranoid. We were just talking, and he was comforting me because... Because what? Because your husband works too hard to keep food on the table and pay for this place? I gestured around the trendy cafe she'd insisted on opening 3 years ago. Yeah, that must be really tough for you. Eric chuckled, the sound grating like nails on a chalkboard. Look, Vincent, I understand you might feel threatened. Threatened? I laughed, short and sharp. By you? The guy who's been divorced twice and still lives off Daddy's trust fund? That's rich, Eric. Jessica moved between us, her hands raised. Stop it, both of you. This is ridiculous. You're right, I said, picking up my toolbox. It is ridiculous. My wife sneaking around with her ex-boyfriend, pretending it's innocent friendship. What was I thinking, being bothered by that? We are friends. Jessica's voice rose to near shouting. I've known Eric since high school. Just because we dated doesn't mean we can't be friends now. You're being completely unreasonable. Am I? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Then why didn't you mention these friendly little after-hours meetings? Or why did I have to walk in here and find you two practically making out? We weren't making out, but her protest sounded weak, even to her own ears. Eric straightened his shoulders, puffing up like a peacock. Vincent, I think you're overreacting. Jessica is a grown woman who can choose her own friends. Maybe if you trusted your wife more. Trust. I set the toolbox down again, my hands flexing at my sides. That's funny, coming from a guy who's been circling my marriage like a vulture for months. That's not... Jessica started, but Eric cut her off. I've been nothing but respectful, he said, his tone condescending. If you can't handle your wife having male friends, maybe the problem isn't with us? The silence stretched taut between us. I could hear the old building settling, the distant sound of traffic on Main Street, the rapid beating of my own heart. 12 years of marriage, and it had come to this. My wife defending another man in front of me. You know what, Jess? I said finally, my voice deadly calm. You're absolutely right. You should be able to choose your own friends. Relief flickered across her face. Thank you. I knew you'd... So here's your choice. I picked up my toolbox and headed for the door. Either accept that I won't be sticking around to watch you play house with your ex-boyfriend or keep doing whatever this is, but you can't have both. Vince, wait. I turned back, my hand on the door handle. Actually, scratch that. I'm making the choice for you. Enjoy your friendship, Jessica. I'm done. The bell above the door chimed as I walked out into the cool Maine evening, leaving my wife and her friend staring after me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The Victorian house we'd bought 8 years ago felt different when I walked in that night. The creaky floorboards, the faded wallpaper Jessica kept meaning to replace, the cluttered living room filled with her Café magazines. It all looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. Maybe it was just me. I went straight to the basement, my sanctuary that Jessica had always called Vince's Cave. She'd never shown much interest in coming down here, which was fine by me. It was where I kept my real tools, my military memorabilia, and most importantly, my thoughts. I was halfway through packing my clothes when I heard her car in the driveway. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows, followed by the sharp staccato of her heels on the hardwood. Vince! Her voice echoed through the house. Vince! I kept folding clothes. Let her yell. I know you're here! Your truck is in the driveway! The basement door flew open, and she came clattering down the stairs in her Café outfit, black slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people made in a day. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, hands on her hips. "You embarrassed me in front of Eric." "I embarrassed you?" I looked up from my duffel bag. "That's what you're worried about? Not the fact that your husband caught you cheating?" "I wasn't cheating." She threw her hands up. "God, Vince, we were talking. He gave me a hug because I was upset about the quarterly taxes, and you walked in at exactly the wrong moment." "A hug?" I nodded thoughtfully. "Is that what we're calling it when a man has his hands on your ass and his tongue down your throat?" Her face flushed again. We didn't, you're exaggerating." "Am I?" I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder. "Funny thing about being a mechanic, Jess. You learn to notice details, like lipstick smears and wrinkled clothes, and the fact that your bra was twisted." She instinctively glanced down, her hand moving to smooth her blouse. The gesture told me everything I needed to know. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "Pete's got a room above the garage. I'll stay there until I figure things out." "This is ridiculous." The anger flared back up. "You're throwing away 12 years of marriage because you can't handle me having a friend." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at her. "Jessica, I've been married to you for 12 years. I know the difference between friendship and whatever that was tonight. The question is, do you?" "Eric and I have history, yes, but nothing." I started up the stairs. "You made your choice the minute you decided to sneak around with him. I'm just making mine." She followed me up, her voice getting shriller with each step. "So that's it? You're just going to leave? What about counseling? What about working through this?" At the front door, I turned to face her one last time. "Work through what, exactly? You want to keep Eric in your life, and I won't be married to a woman who's playing games with her ex. It's pretty simple." "It's not games." Tears started streaming down her face, but I'd seen Jessica cry before when she wanted something. He understands me in ways that you don't. There it is." I opened the door. The truth finally comes out. "That's not what I meant." "Sure it is." I stepped onto the porch. "Give Eric my regards, Jess. I'm sure he'll be very understanding." I drove to Strickland's garage in silence, my mind already shifting into tactical mode. 12 years in the Army teaches you that when a situation goes to hell, you don't waste time crying about it. You assess, you plan, and you execute. Pete Kowalski was waiting for me in the garage office, a beer in one hand and a knowing look on his weathered face. At 55, Pete had seen enough of life's ugliness to recognize the signs. "Rough night?" he asked, not looking up from the invoice he was reviewing. "You could say that." I dropped my bag on the floor. "Mind if I take you up on that offer to use the upstairs room?" "Course not." He closed the invoice book and studied my face. "Want to talk about it?" Pete was one of the few people who knew about Jessica's recent friendship with Eric. He'd seen them together at Murphy's bar last week, whispering in a corner booth like conspirators. "Walked in on my wife and her ex-boyfriend at the cafe tonight," I said, sinking into the ancient office chair. "She claims they're just friends." "And you believe that?" "About as much as I believe in the tooth fairy." Pete cracked a grin. "So what's the plan, boss?" That was the thing about Pete. Ex-felon turned loyal employee, he understood that sometimes life required a more creative approach to problem solving. "Right now, get some sleep and figure out my next move." I stood up and grabbed my bag. "But Pete?" "Yeah?" "If Jessica or her boyfriend come around here causing trouble, you let me know." "You got it." He raised his beer in a mock toast. "Here's to new beginnings." As I climbed the narrow stairs to the small apartment above the garage, I could hear my phone buzzing with text messages. I didn't need to look to know they were from Jessica, probably a mix of anger, tears, and manipulation designed to get me to come home and pretend nothing had happened. Instead, I powered off the phone and stared out the window at the dark street below. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of untangling 12 years of shared life. Tonight, I'd sleep better than I had in months. The next morning brought a steady drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I was under the hood of Mrs. Patterson's ancient Buick when I heard heels clicking across the garage floor. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. "We need to talk," Jessica announced, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she'd rehearsed what she was going to say. I kept working on the carburetor. "I thought we talked plenty last night. Vince, please, look at me." I straightened up slowly, wiping my hands on a shop rag. She looked like she'd spent the night crying. Red-rimmed eyes, smudged makeup she'd tried to fix, hair that had lost its usual perfect styling. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. "You look like hell," I said. "Thanks. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear." She hugged her purse against her chest like a shield. "I didn't sleep at all last night." "Neither did I. but you don't see me showing up at your workplace for a dramatic confrontation. This isn't dramatic. Her voice pitched higher. This is me trying to save our marriage. Pete emerged from the office, took one look at the situation, and made himself scarce. Smart man. Okay, I said, leaning against the Buick's fender. I'm listening. Jessica took a deep breath, clearly launching into her prepared speech. What you saw last night, it wasn't what you think. Eric came by because he's been having problems with his business and he needed someone to talk to. We've been friends since high school, Vince, long before you and I even met. Oh, friends don't usually grope each other in empty restaurants. He was upset. I was comforting him. Sometimes people need physical comfort when they're going through a hard time. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Physical comfort? Is that what you call it? You're twisting everything. Tears started flowing again. I love you, Vince. I married you, not him. Doesn't that count for anything? It used to. I crossed my arms. Before you started sneaking around. I wasn't sneaking. We've had coffee a few times, and yes, we've talked on the phone, but it's completely innocent. Coffee. I nodded. What about dinner at Rossetti's last Tuesday? Sophie mentioned she saw you two there. Jessica's face went pale. Sophie Martinez was her best friend and the manager at the cafe. If Sophie was talking, the whole town probably knew by now. We ran into each other and he was hungry, so you had a romantic dinner with your ex-boyfriend and forgot to mention it to your husband. Got it. It wasn't romantic. Candlelit table for two at the most expensive restaurant in town. Yeah, totally platonic. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the oil-stained concrete floor. When she looked up, her expression had hardened. You know what your problem is, Vince? You don't trust me. After 12 years of marriage, you still don't trust me. Trust is earned, Jessica, and lately you haven't been doing much to earn it. So that's it? Her voice turned cold. You're going to punish me for having a friend? A friend who you dated for 3 years. A friend who's been divorced twice because he can't keep his hands off other people's wives. A friend who's been circling our marriage like a shark since the day you opened that cafe. Eric is exactly what he's always been, I interrupted. A spoiled rich boy who wants what he can't have. And right now, that's you. Jessica's jaw tightened. You're being paranoid and controlling. And you're being naive, or maybe not so naive. The accusation hung in the air between us. I could see her processing it, deciding how to respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. I'm going to say this once, and then I'm done trying to explain myself to you. She stepped closer, her green eyes blazing. Eric Dalton is my friend. He's been my friend since we were 17 years old, and he's going to continue being my friend whether you like it or not. If you can't handle that, if you can't trust me enough to have a friendship with someone I care about, then maybe we don't have the marriage I thought we did. So that's your ultimatum? That's my reality. She lifted her chin defiantly. Accept my friendship with Eric or forget me. Your choice. I stared at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved for 12 years, who was now standing in my garage demanding I accept her emotional affair as innocent friendship. The Jessica I'd married would never have put another man before her husband, but that Jessica seemed to have disappeared somewhere along the way. Easy choice, honey, I said finally. The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually took a step backward, her face crumpling. What? You heard me. If those are my options, accept your boyfriend or lose you, then I choose to lose you. Easy choice. Vince, no, that's not, I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you said. I turned back to the Buick's engine. And I meant what I said. You can have Eric or you can have me, but you can't have both. Please don't do this. Her voice broke. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can what? Sit in some therapist's office while you explain why you need your ex-boyfriend in your life more than you need your husband's respect? That's not fair. I looked at her one more time. You know what's not fair, Jess? A wife who makes her husband compete with another man for her attention? A wife who chooses her ex-boyfriend's feelings over her husband's concerns? A wife who issues ultimatums instead of cutting ties with the man who's destroying her marriage? She stood there crying, mascara running down her cheeks, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen her in years. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take it all back and pretend everything was fine. But the bigger part of me, the part that had learned hard lessons about respect and loyalty in the army, knew that some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. Goodbye, Jessica, I said, and went back to work on the engine. I heard her heels clicking rapidly across the concrete, then the slam of her car door and the screech of tires as she peeled out of the parking lot. Pete emerged from wherever he'd been hiding, shaking his head. That looked painful, he said. Yeah, well, I tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. Sometimes the truth hurts. You okay? I straightened up and looked out at the gray sky through the open garage door. Ask me in a few months. Word travels fast in a town like Millbrook, Maine. By Thursday morning, half the regulars at Murphy's bar knew that Vince and Jessica Strickland were separated, and the other half had theories about why. I discovered this when I stopped by for my usual coffee and found the conversation die the moment I walked through the door. Morning, Vince, called out Danny Murphy from behind the bar, his Irish accent still thick after 20 years in America. The usual? Just coffee today, Danny. I slid onto my regular stool, aware of the sideways glances from the other customers. Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store next to Jessica's Café, cleared his throat. Sorry to hear about your troubles, Vince. Appreciate that, Tom. For what it's worth, Tom continued, lowering his voice. I never liked that Dalton character. Too slick, you know. Always felt like he was looking down on the rest of us. A few other heads nodded in agreement. Eric had never been particularly popular with the working-class crowd that frequented Murphy's. His money and attitude had always rubbed people the wrong way, but not everyone was on my side. I think you're being too hard on Jessica, said Linda Walsh, who worked as a secretary at the town hall. She's always been friendly with everyone. Maybe you're reading too much into it. Friendly is one thing, muttered Joe Kowalski, Pete's cousin. But sneaking around with your ex is something else entirely. Who says she was sneaking? Linda shot back. Maybe she just didn't want to deal with her husband's jealousy every time she talked to an old friend. The conversation was heading toward an argument when my phone buzzed. Text message from a number I didn't recognize. This is Sophie. We need to talk. Meet me at the diner on Route 9 at 2 p.m. Come alone. Sophie Martinez had been Jessica's best friend since college and her right hand at the cafe. If she wanted to meet secretly, it meant she had information I needed to hear. I finished my coffee in silence and headed back to the garage, my mind racing. Sophie's loyalty had always been to Jessica, but she was also pragmatic enough to recognize when her friend was making a mistake. The fact that she wanted to meet suggested Jessica's version of events wasn't the whole truth. The Route 9. Diner sat on the outskirts of town, the kind of place truckers and travelers used, but locals rarely visited. Perfect for a clandestine meeting. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. Sophie showed up right on time, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and her usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy. She slid into the booth across from me without making eye contact. Thanks for coming, she said, fidgeting with her coffee cup. What's this about, Sophie? She glanced around the nearly empty diner, then leaned forward. I need to tell you something about Jessica and Eric, something she doesn't know I saw. My gut tightened. I'm listening. Last Friday night, after we closed the cafe, I went back because I forgot my purse. The lights were off, but I could hear voices in the back office. She paused, clearly struggling with what she was about to say. It was Jessica and Eric. They were intimate. Define intimate. They were kissing. Not like friends, Vince, like lovers. And she was telling him how unhappy she's been, how you don't understand her anymore, how she wishes things could be different. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression neutral. What else? Eric was talking about his apartment, about how she should come over this weekend when you're working on that big repair job. He said they could have the whole weekend together. Did she agree? Sophie nodded miserably. She said she'd think of an excuse to tell you, maybe a girls' weekend with me or a cafe conference in Portland. I sat back in the booth, processing this information. It was worse than I'd thought. This wasn't just an emotional affair or poor boundaries with an ex-boyfriend. This was a full-blown betrayal, complete with lies and planned deceptions. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because Jessica is my friend, but what she's doing is wrong. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She's throwing away a good marriage for a man who's going to break her heart. Eric Dalton doesn't love her, Vince. He just wants to win. He wants to prove he can take her away from you. And Jessica doesn't see that? She's caught up in the excitement of it all. The sneaking around, the forbidden romance, the feeling of being desired by someone new. Sophie wiped her eyes with a napkin. She thinks Eric represents some kind of escape from her ordinary life. Her ordinary life with her ordinary husband. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I signaled the waitress for more coffee. What do you think I should do with this information? I don't know, but Jessica's planning to meet him this Saturday at his apartment while you're at work. She's going to tell you she's visiting her sister in Bangor. Jessica's sister lived in California, and I knew her schedule well enough to know she wasn't expecting any visitors. The lie was already prepared, which meant this had been planned for a while. Sophie, can I ask you something? Sure. How long has this been going on? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. The flirting started about 2 months ago. The secret meetings, maybe 3 weeks. But the real emotional affair? I think it's been building since she opened the cafe. Eric's been a regular customer from day one, always making excuses to hang around and chat. And you never said anything? I tried to warn her that she was playing with fire, but she insisted it was just friendship. She said you were too jealous and possessive to understand. Sophie looked up at me with guilty eyes. I'm sorry, Vince. I should have told you sooner. You're telling me now. That's what matters. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the conversation settling between us. Finally, Sophie spoke again. What are you going to do? I thought about it carefully before answering. I'm going to give Jessica exactly what she wants, her freedom to choose Eric over her marriage, but I'm going to make sure she understands the consequences of that choice. Meaning? Meaning she can't have both, Sophie. She can't keep me as her safety net while she explores her options with Eric. It's time for her to make a real choice, with real consequences. Sophie nodded slowly. I think that's probably the right thing to do, even though it's going to hurt her. She's already made her choice, I said, standing up and throwing a 20 on the table. She just hasn't admitted it to herself yet. As I walked back to my truck, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The uncertainty was over. I knew exactly what Jessica was planning, and I knew exactly what I was going to do about it. For the first time since this whole mess started, I was back in control. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical for Maine in early October. I was supposed to be at the garage working on a complete engine rebuild for a customer's classic Mustang, a job that would keep me busy until well past dark. Jessica knew this because I'd mentioned it several times during our brief, awkward phone conversations about dividing up our belongings. Instead, I was parked across the street from Eric Dalton's luxury apartment building, watching and waiting. Jessica's Honda pulled into the visitor parking at exactly 11:15. She sat in the car for several minutes, probably gathering her courage or checking her appearance in the mirror. When she finally got out, she was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something blue and clingy that was definitely not her usual casual Saturday attire. She looked around nervously before hurrying toward the building entrance, a small overnight bag in her hand. The bag told me everything I needed to know about her intentions for the day. I waited another 10 minutes, then walked into the building behind an elderly resident who was checking his mail. The lobby was all marble and brass, the kind of ostentatious display of wealth that Eric loved. I took the elevator to the 8th floor and found his apartment at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices inside, Jessica's laughter, higher pitched than usual, and Eric's deep chuckle. I pushed the door open and walked in. They were on the couch, Jessica curled up against Eric's side with a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up when I entered, and the color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. "Vince?" She scrambled to her feet, nearly dropping the wine glass. How did you... Hello, honey. I closed the door behind me with deliberate calm. Fancy meeting you here. Eric stood up slowly, his face cycling through surprise, guilt, and finally settling on defensive arrogance. Vincent, this is unexpected. I'll bet it is. I looked around the apartment, all glass and chrome and expensive art that probably cost more than most people's cars. Nice place, Eric. Very sterile. Vince, I can explain. Jessica started, but I held up a hand. Please don't. I think the situation is pretty self-explanatory. I gestured at her overnight bag sitting by the door, at the wine, at the way they'd been cuddled together on the couch. You told me you were visiting your sister in Bangor, but here you are, playing house with your ex-boyfriend. It's not what you think? Really? Because what I think is that my wife lied to me so she could spend the weekend fucking another man. Am I wrong? The crude language made her flinch. I rarely swore around Jessica, but the situation seemed to call for brutal honesty. You don't understand, she said, tears starting to flow. Eric and I, we have a connection that what? That's worth destroying our marriage. I turned to Eric, who was standing there trying to look dignified in his silk bathrobe. And you? What's your excuse? Can't find a woman who isn't married to someone else? Eric's jaw tightened. Jessica is unhappy, Vincent. She has been for years. I'm just giving her what you obviously can't. Which is? Understanding. Passion. A man who appreciates her instead of taking her for granted. I laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Passion. Right. How long do you think that's going to last, Eric? A month? 2 months? Until the next married woman catches your eye? This is different, Jessica said quickly. What Eric and I have is exactly what he had with his first wife, I interrupted. And his second wife, both of whom he cheated on, by the way. Did he mention that part during your romantic conversations? Jessica looked at Eric with confusion. You said they didn't understand you. They didn't, Eric said smoothly. But Jessica, you're different. What we have is bullshit, I finished. But you know what? You two deserve each other. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of them together. Jessica in her sexy dress, Eric in his bathrobe, the wine glasses, the overnight bag, evidence for the divorce proceedings that were now inevitable. What are you doing? Jessica demanded. Documenting your choices, I said, continuing to take pictures. Since you've decided to throw away 12 years of marriage for a weekend with Mr. Wonderful here, I want to make sure we have a clear record of why. Stop it. She lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. Why? Ashamed of your choices? If this is what you really want, why hide it? Eric moved toward me, his face flushed with anger. That's enough, Vincent. You're being pathetic. Pathetic? I pocketed my phone and faced him. You're probably right. A man who fights for a cheating wife is pretty pathetic, so I'm not going to fight. What? Jessica's voice was small and confused. I'm not going to fight for you, Jess. I'm not going to beg you to come home or promise to change or pretend this never happened. You've made your choice, and I'm accepting it. But I didn't mean... She looked lost, like a child who'd been caught in a lie and didn't know how to get out of it. You didn't mean what? To get caught? To hurt me? To destroy our marriage? I shook my head. It doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is what you did. I walked to the door, then turned back for one final look at the woman I'd loved for 12 years and the man who'd stolen her away. Enjoy your weekend, I said. And Eric, take good care of her. She's your problem now. The last thing I heard as I closed the door was Jessica calling my name, her voice desperate and broken. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and stepped out into the gray October morning a free man. The drive back to the garage was strangely peaceful. No more uncertainty, no more wondering what Jessica was really doing or thinking, no more pretending that our marriage could survive her betrayal. It was over, and for the first time in weeks, I knew exactly where I stood. Pete was waiting for me in the office, a cup of coffee and a knowing look on his weathered face. How'd it go? He asked. About like you'd expect. I sank into the chair across from his desk. She chose him? I'm sorry, boss. Don't be. Better to know the truth than live with a lie. Pete studied my face carefully. So what's next? I thought about the photos on my phone, about the divorce lawyer I'd need to call, about the long process of untangling a 12-year marriage. But mostly, I thought about the relief I felt at finally being free of Jessica's lies and manipulations. Next, we get back to work, I said, standing up and heading for the garage. That Mustang isn't going to rebuild itself. Behind me, Pete chuckled. That's the spirit, boss. That's the spirit. The divorce papers were filed on Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, the whole town knew about Jessica's affair with Eric Dalton. Small towns have their own communication network, faster and more efficient than any social media platform. I was replacing brake pads on Charlie Morrison's pickup when my sister Kelly walked into the garage. At 38, she was 2 years younger than me, but had always acted like the older sibling. Being a cop in a small town had only intensified her protective instincts. Heard you had an interesting weekend, she said, leaning against the workbench. News travels fast. Sophie Martinez came into the station this morning. Wanted to file a report about Jessica harassing her. I looked up from the brake assembly. What kind of harassment? Apparently, Jessica found out that Sophie talked to you about the affair. She showed up at Sophie's apartment at 6 this morning, screaming and threatening her. Sophie's scared enough to want a restraining order. Jessica's always had a temper when she doesn't get her way. Kelly crossed her arms, studying me with cop eyes. You okay, Vince? Really okay? Better than I've been in months, I said, and meant it. It's amazing how much clearer everything becomes once you stop pretending. And the divorce? My lawyer says it should be straightforward. No kids, no shared business interests, and plenty of evidence of adultery. Jessica can keep the cafe. It's mortgaged to the hilt anyway. I'll keep the garage and the house. Kelly nodded approvingly. What about Eric Dalton? What about him? You planning any creative revenge? I grinned at my sister. Kelly, you're a police officer. Are you seriously asking me if I'm planning to break the law? I'm asking if you're planning anything that might require me to arrest you later. Nothing illegal, I assured her. But Eric's about to learn that actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences are uncomfortable. Before Kelly could ask what I meant, the phone in the office started ringing. Pete answered it, then called out to me. Vince, it's for you. Says it's important. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and walked to the office. Pete handed me the phone with a strange expression on his face. Vincent Strickland, I said. Mr. Strickland, this is Patricia Wells from First National Bank. I'm calling about the loan application for Jessica's Table restaurant. What about it? Well, as co-signer on the original loan, you have certain rights regarding any modifications or extensions. Mrs. Strickland is requesting a significant increase in her credit line, but given the circumstances, we wanted to discuss this with you first. I'd forgotten about co-signing Jessica's business loan 3 years ago. She'd needed my signature and credit score to qualify for the financing, and like a good husband, I'd supported her dream. What kind of increase? I asked. She's requesting an additional $50,000. She claims it's for renovations and equipment upgrades, but frankly, Mr. Strickland, the restaurant's current financial situation doesn't support that level of additional debt. I see. And as co-signer, I can block this request? You can, yes. Or you can remove yourself as co-signer entirely, which would require Mrs. Strickland to qualify for the new loan on her own. I thought about Jessica's spending habits, her tendency to live beyond her means, and the fact that she was now planning a future with a man who'd been divorced twice for financial irresponsibility. I'd like to remove myself as co-signer, I said, immediately. I understand. We'll need you to come in and sign some paperwork, but we can process that request right away. After I hung up, Pete was grinning at me. That sounded like the first shoe dropping. Something like that. I returned to Charlie's truck, but my mind was already working through the implications. Without my credit backing her loan, Jessica would have to qualify on her own. Given the cafe's shaky finances and her personal spending habits, that wasn't likely to happen. The second shoe dropped on Wednesday. I was having lunch at Murphy's bar when Tom Bradley sat down next to me, his face grim. Vince, I need to talk to you about something. What's on your mind, Tom? It's about Jessica and that Dalton character. They came into my store this morning, acting like they owned the place. Jessica was picking out expensive fixtures for the cafe, and Dalton was encouraging her to buy the most expensive everything. Okay. Here's the thing. When they got to the register, Jessica's credit card was declined. All 3 of them. So Dalton steps up, all smooth and confident, and his card gets declined too. I raised an eyebrow. Both of them. Both of them. Jessica started crying right there in my store, and Dalton got all red-faced and angry. Started yelling about bank errors and temporary holds on his accounts. Tom shook his head. But I've seen that look before, Vince. That's not a bank error. That's maxed out credit and overdue bills. Interesting. Gets better. After they left, I called my buddy who works at the bank. Seems like Dalton's been living way beyond his means for months. His real estate business is failing, he's behind on his rent, and he's been juggling credit cards to stay afloat. The picture was becoming clearer. Eric wasn't the successful businessman he pretended to be. He was a man drowning in debt, looking for a lifeline. And Jessica, with her cafe and her husband's stable income, had looked like the perfect solution. Thanks for the heads up, Tom. Just thought you should know what kind of man your wife left you for. By Thursday, the third shoe dropped with a resounding crash. I was closing up the garage when Eric Dalton's BMW pulled into the parking lot. He got out slowly, his usual confident swagger replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. Vincent, he said, approaching me with his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. We need to talk. Do we? Look, I know you hate me right now, and I understand why. But we're both reasonable men. Maybe we can work something out. I leaned against my truck, curious to see where this was going. What kind of something? She's having a hard time right now. The divorce, the stress, the financial pressure. She's not thinking clearly. Financial pressure? Eric's face flushed. The cafe is struggling, and without your support on the loan? I nodded understanding. So now that Jessica can't get her credit line increase and your own finances are apparently in shambles, you're here to what? Ask me to help? I'm asking you to consider what's best for Jessica. She built that cafe from nothing. It's her dream, her life's work. Don't let your anger at me destroy what she's worked so hard to create. I stared at him for a long moment. This man who'd stolen my wife and was now begging me to save her business. Eric, let me ask you something. If Jessica's cafe fails, if she loses everything she's worked for, will you still want to be with her? Of course. I love her. Even if she's broke? even if she has to move back in with her parents, even if she can't afford the fancy clothes and expensive dinners you're used to? Eric's hesitation was barely perceptible, but I caught it. Yes, he said, but the word lacked conviction. Here's what I think, Eric. I think you saw Jessica as a meal ticket, a successful businesswoman married to a stable, reliable man. I think you figured you could have your cake and eat it too, steal her away from me while benefiting from the financial security I provided. That's not. But now you're realizing that Jessica without my support isn't quite the prize you thought she was, and your own financial house of cards is collapsing. So you're here, hat in hand, asking the husband you betrayed to bail out the woman who cheated on him. Eric's face had gone pale. Vincent, please. I'm asking you to be the bigger man here. I am being the bigger man, I said, getting into my truck. I'm letting both of you face the consequences of your choices without interference from me. That's as big as it gets. As I drove away, I could see Eric in my rearview mirror, standing alone in the parking lot, looking like a man who just realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The final shoe dropped on Friday morning when Jessica called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. Vince, please, she cried. I need to see you. I need to explain. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do. What's falling apart, Jessica? The cafe, my credit, everything. The bank is calling in my loan, and Eric says he needs some time to think about our relationship. I see. Please, can we meet? Can we talk? I know I made mistakes, but maybe we can work through this. Maybe we can... Jessica, I interrupted gently. Do you remember what you told me in the garage last week? What? You said I had to accept your friendship with Eric, or forget you. You said those were my only choices. But that was before. Before you realized that Eric isn't the man you thought he was, before you discovered that actions have consequences, before you learned that you can't have everything you want without giving up something else? She was quiet for a long moment, except for the sound of her crying. I made a mistake, she whispered. Yes, you did. But it's not my job to fix your mistakes anymore, Jessica. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. But I love you. No, you don't. You love the security I represented. You love having a safety net while you explored your options. But you don't love me enough to choose me over another man, and that's not the kind of love I want. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet garage office, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Complete peace with my decisions. Jessica had gambled our marriage on a man who turned out to be a fraud, and now she was facing the consequences of that choice. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't revenge. It was simply justice. Pete poked his head into the office. Everything okay, boss? Everything's perfect, Pete. Absolutely perfect. And for the first time in months, I meant it.